The old man's hands were shaking when they dragged him into the Sundered Concord's grand hearing, but not from fear. Elias Marrow had counted the days in his cell by the meals he refused to eat, 112 of them, and the guards had stopped bothering to hide their amusement at the sight of him. Silver-haired, stooped, wrists thin enough that his restraints hung loose. To the 9 species seated in judgment above him, he looked like exactly what their intelligence reports claimed. A broken, elderly prisoner from a species barely worth the fuels spent capturing him. Elias Marrow, intoned Chief Arbiter Vos Kellen, a towering Pharaonis with skin like polished obsidian. You stand accused of destroying a Concord listening station and killing 40 of our engineers. You will provide the coordinates of your homeworld, or you will be executed at the conclusion of this hearing. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Not cruel exactly. More the amused condescension of species who had never once lost a war of conquest in 400 years of expansion. One delegate, a young Calvexi diplomat named Yressa, didn't laugh. She watched the old man's face and felt something she couldn't quite name. Elias lifted his head. His eyes, pale blue and startlingly clear for a man his captors had assumed was decades past his prime, moved slowly across the assembled council. You've been calling me the old human for 4 months, he said, voice rough from disuse but steady. Funny thing about that name. Back home, they used to call me something else. And what? Vos Kellen asked, already bored. Did your people call you? Elias smiled. Not with malice, but with the tired, patient weight of a man who had hoped, right up until this moment, that he wouldn't have to say what came next. They called me Sergeant. The chamber's amusement died so suddenly that the silence afterward felt like something physical. You want war? Elias asked, and for the first time his shaking hands went still. Then we'll give you war, but you should know, I already started it, 4 months ago. The moment your listening station picked up my transmission, nobody in the chamber understood what he meant. They would understand within the hour, 3 days before his capture. None of this had begun with war at all. It had begun with a distress call. Elias Marrow, 68 years old and 30 years retired from active service, had been aboard a private survey vessel near the edge of charted human space, cataloging debris from a mining accident for insurance purposes. Quiet, unremarkable work for a quiet, unremarkable retirement. He hadn't expected the Concord scout ship. Few humans had in those days. The Sundered Concord operated far beyond Earth's border colonies, a coalition of 9 species that had spent 4 centuries expanding outward through careful conquest, never overextending, never engaging an enemy without overwhelming numerical superiority, never leaving survivors capable of organizing meaningful resistance. They had detected Earth 8 months earlier. Standard doctrine called for a listening station first, months of passive observation before any contact, gathering enough intelligence to guarantee an efficient, low-cost annexation. Elias's survey vessel had stumbled directly into their observation perimeter. What followed wasn't a battle. His single unarmed ship stood no chance against even a scout-class Concord vessel, and he'd known it the moment their tractor beam locked on. He hadn't resisted capture. He hadn't tried to run. He'd simply sent one final transmission before they boarded. Not a distress call, not a warning, but 7 words logged by Concord Communications and dismissed by their analysts as meaningless. Tell them I found the listening post. No one expected what that transmission would set into motion. What the Concord's intelligence division didn't know, what their 4 centuries of successful conquest had never once required them to learn, was that Earth's outer colonies operated under a defense protocol drafted decades earlier by a small group of veterans who had spent their careers studying every first contact scenario humanity could imagine. Elias Marrow had been one of those veterans. Before his retirement, he'd spent 11 years designing exactly this protocol, a distributed, decentralized response network that didn't rely on any single command structure, any single fleet, or any single leader who could be captured, killed, or coerced into surrender. The moment his transmission confirmed the existence and rough coordinates of a Concord listening post, the protocol activated automatically across 17 border colonies without needing a single order from Earth itself. The truth stunned the Concord's tactical division 3 weeks later, when a coordinated strike, small, fast, deniable vessels operating with no centralized command the Concord could target or negotiate with, destroyed the listening station and vanished before retaliation could be organized. Chief Arbiter Vos Kellen had assumed, reasonably by Concord standards, that capturing the human responsible for the initial transmission would allow them to identify and dismantle whoever was truly in command. That assumption was about to cost the Concord everything they thought they understood about their newest neighbor. Yressa found Elias alone in his cell 2 days after the hearing, having used her diplomatic clearance to arrange what she told the guards was a routine welfare check. "Why didn't you give them the coordinates?" she asked, settling onto the floor across from him, ignoring the disapproval that would certainly follow if anyone learned a Kalvaxi diplomat had chosen to sit rather than stand over a prisoner. "They're going to execute you either way." "Because it wouldn't matter," Elias said. "There isn't one homeworld coordinate that stops what's already moving. There's 17 colonies, 40-some independent response fleets, and about 200 years of contingency planning that doesn't need me alive to keep running. That's not possible. Every species we've ever encountered organizes around central leadership. Remove the leadership, the resistance collapses." Elias studied her for a long moment, really studied her. The way a man studies someone he's decided is worth being honest with. "You're young," he said. "You weren't part of deciding to attack us." "No." "Then I'll tell you something the Arbiter won't want you to hear. Humans used to fight like that too. Centralized command. Single points of failure, whole wars won or lost because you killed the right general. We learned better. Cost us a lot of good people learning it, but we learned." He shrugged faintly. "You didn't capture our leadership, Yressa. You captured a retired sergeant who happened to be in the wrong debris field at the wrong time. There isn't a version of this where that mistake doesn't cost you." Nobody had told Yressa the truth so plainly in her entire career. She left the cell that night, carrying a question she couldn't shake. What kind of species built a defense so resilient that even losing everyone who understood it couldn't stop it from working? The Concord learned the answer 3 weeks later, when the war Elias had promised finally reached their border fleet, stationed at the edge of human space. It wasn't the invasion Vos Kellen had prepared for. There were no massed human battle fleets, no dramatic declarations, no attempt to reclaim Elias Marrow through force. Instead, every Concord vessel patrolling near human territory began experiencing the same coordinated, methodical disruption. Supply lines quietly severed, communication relays disabled hours before critical operations, listening posts destroyed within days of activation, always by small, untraceable strike teams that vanished before retaliation could organize. It wasn't overwhelming force. It was something the Concord's 4 centuries of conquest doctrine had never been built to counter. Patient, decentralized resistance that cost them a little more each week, with no central target to eliminate, and no single victory that would end it. Everything changed in the moment. Vos Kellen finally understood what humanity had actually built. Not a military, but a culture so thoroughly practiced in resilience that capturing their people only proved how little that captured anything that mattered. Yressa stood before the full council 4 weeks later, having spent every night since her conversation with Elias compiling a report she knew would end her career if it failed to convince them. "We were never fighting a species," she told the assembled delegates. "We were fighting a philosophy. Every human we've captured, killed, or interrogated has told us some version of the same thing. It was never about one leader, one fleet, or one homeworld. It was about building something that survives losing all 3. "And your recommendation?" Vos Kellen asked, his earlier confidence gone entirely.